There's a lot of mistakes you can fix in post. You could fix white balance problems, you can fix underexposure, but if you don't grab focus, the photo is useless. Or is it? Stay tuned till the end. I have a tip if you miss focus a little bit. There's a way to fix it. It's called the teaser there, so you can watch to the end. Don't skip. All right, tip number 1, try to understand your camera's autofocus behaviors. For example, I used to shoot events with this Canon 5D Mark III and also the Mark IV, and I know the behavior of this camera is definitely different than what I'm using today mostly, which is the Omar. No, this is the Nikon Z8. And so you have to understand the way your autofocus works. And the only way to do that is really to, at home, set up situations that are like events and like dark conditions that maybe you're facing and see what the camera does. So that's something I did a lot of. I tortured my kids to try to get situations where they were like dancing and running towards me. And then later I would go on the computer and check the percent of my hit rate. Now, by the way, when I first started shooting with the Canon 5D series, the only mode I stayed in was a single focus point and AFS, single focus mode. That means the camera would focus and stop, it would confirm focus, and then I wowould fire. And that's today how if I was gonna shoot this camera for an event, that's how I would shoot this camera. However, when I moved to the Sony a7 III, that camera had eye autofocus, and so I set 2 buttons on the back of that camera, one to be eye autofocus and one to be a single focus point. And come to think of it, for all my cameras, every camera I use, I always want a single focus mode, something that's ready to grab onto an object, and then my other one is sort of letting the camera take over. So that's your eye autofocus or your 3D tracking or anything like that. So my cameras usually have 2 buttons for 2 different modes. And by the way, try to read the manual. And if not, go on YouTube. There's a bunch of tutorials probably for your camera's autofocus modes. The main point here is know what your camera's doing. Number 2, know what your lens is doing. Some lenses are better at focusing than others. There's motors in there. There's like little goblins that do things. So test your lenses as well. Try to set up situations where you're focusing at the minimum focus distance. Like for this lens right here, this 20 millimeter lens, there's a minimum focus distance about there. That's really close. And then focus to something far and see how quick it can focus. Some lenses are super rapid. They go from one to the other extreme really quickly, while other lenses hunt a little bit. And if you have a lens that hunts, you have to keep that in mind if you're shooting, that your lens has to sometimes, the motors may be a little slow for what you're trying to do. You should also test your lens in AFS mode, single focus mode, and AFC mode. I know on this 5D Mark III, it's definitely AFS, single focus. I'm never going to AI servo is what Canon calls it. I'm not going to continuous on this. However, on mirrorless cameras, the Sonys do this, the Nikons do this, I'm sure the new Canons do this, is living in autofocus continuous mode is better at nailing focus and quicker than AFS. But again, this goes back to point 1, test your camera, run your own tests, and see what your hit rate is. Number 3, this is something I wish I want to tell myself like 10 years ago, is slow down. I had so much anxiety to grab the shot that a lot of times I was doing 2 things. I was moving too quickly, faster than the camera could keep up. And number 2, I would sometimes over-focus. I would actually have so much anxiety that I would keep pressing the button and the camera's like, what are you doing? What do you want to do over there? You want to go to the background? So just know that sometimes if you slow down, focus, confirm, and fire might be better. Now, I'm not trying to influence you here, but one thing that's great about the newer cameras is it speeds you up and you get better expressions, better moments. You up your chances of capturing that fleeting moment as opposed to slowing down and capturing something. Number 4, focus on some sort of contrast, especially with like an older camera or a DSLR. Try to look, if someone's wearing a suit, between the white shirt and the dark suit, you want to set your focus point between those two. Setting it to like a wall or something that's completely one color, the camera sometimes will hunt, especially in lower light. So look for contrast in the object that you're focusing on. All right, number 5, pre-focusing. So let's say something's gonna happen. First kiss, a champagne pop. You can do what's called pre-focusing. You focus on where the action's going to happen, and then you wait for the moment, fire at the moment, okay? Now, this works great also if there's an entrance. If people are about to come in through the doors, you can pre-focus on the doors and they can come in. Once they come in, you know you're already focused. That way you don't have to rely on the camera waking up, focusing, they're already past your focus point and you miss the shot. This is a way to almost guarantee to capture a moment, especially if you know the moment is about to happen. This, by the way, brings me to my next point, which is using the back button to focus instead of the shutter. Most cameras, when they come out of the box, you half hold the shutter button to focus, and then you press all the way to fire and get your photograph. That's the default. But a better way to capture moments and be ready for moments and pre-focus for moments is to decouple or remove autofocus from the picture shutter firing button. So what most photographers do is they set it to the thumb. And so the thumb will autofocus, and then the finger, you can let go of the camera and it's pre-focused. It's ready to go. So if it's a candle, back button focus, now I'm waiting. When they go light it, I just fire. If it's a door entrance, I could pre-focus, back button focus on the doors, and now I'm waiting. As soon as the doors open, pop. You can lock your focus on most cameras, by the way, if you just half hold the shutter. A lot of times you can set a button to half hold the shutter and then lock your focus, then let go of the camera. But I don't work that way. Once you learn the back button focus, it's really hard to go back. Now, speaking of people coming into the entrance and running in like crazy, that's probably the most stressful thing for your camera. Especially me, I shoot mostly mitzvahs where the kids come running in like crazy. I know a bride walking down the aisle, that's a little bit more chill. So that's a little easier to grab. If it was a bride coming down the aisle, I would use eye autofocus on a modern camera, and I would just keep back button focusing on the bride and firing as she comes down the aisle on an older camera. The next one is using depth of field to your advantage. Look at my hands right here, right? This one is blurry, this one is sharp. Let's stop down our lens. Okay, I'm at f11. Look at my hands now. So this one is slightly more in focus than it was before. And think about if things are further from your camera, things start to be in focus. So one technique you could use with older cameras and slower lenses is understand that you can use zone focusing. Stop your lens down to 5.6 or f8, that gives you more depth. And then you can pre-focus about 1.5 meters, 4 feet-ish, and that means everything 4 feet and beyond is going to be in focus. This is a problem indoors though, because if you start to stop down to f8, f11, it gets really, really dark and then you need more flash. Shooting in bursts. I think this is number 7, but shooting in bursts. When I'm photographing grab and grins or people, I always shoot about 2 or 3 pop, pop, pop. Because sometimes, like if someone has their hand up, sometimes the autofocus will focus on the hand real quick instead of the eye. Sometimes the camera's asleep and it focuses on the background. And sometimes it's just me, like I'm focusing in the wrong spot. By the way, another hint is to turn off your touchscreen. Because if your touchscreen is on and your nose accidentally hits the corner, your autofocus point sometimes moves and you don't notice, especially if you have terrible eyes like I do. And there have been times when the autofocus point is focusing on the corner. So turn off your touch screen, make sure things stay in the center. So going back to shooting in bursts, I will usually shoot mostly 3 shots of a group because sometimes people blink, but also for the autofocus mistakes that sometimes happen. Speaking of groups, if you have a group of 4 or 5, you have to make sure you stop down your lens because you can autofocus on the people in the center, but as the people on the sides curve around, they will start to be blurry, even at f4, man. So the big remedy I use for that is I try not to be too close. I actually will back up, and then you can shoot people at 2.8 or f4. If you back up, almost everything, again, that depth of field, And by the way, there are calculators that show you depth of field for your lens and your distance if you want to nerd out on that stuff. But I back up and make sure everyone's in focus. The next one, limit your autofocus area as things get crazier. You know, if you're shooting like a bride coming down the grass and it's very, you know, they're the only faces that are coming down, you're using a 70-200, you could use eye autofocus and the camera won't get confused. But if you're shooting dance pictures, low light, through hands, I recommend limiting the camera's sort of autopilot. I would limit my autofocus mode. And I've made videos about this for Nikon, is I actually use a little sliver, like a little rectangular sliver where I can kind of shoot through arms and hands. And I still have eye autofocus set. So the camera kind of, I put it on someone's eye that's through things, and then I can focus and fire. So limit your area as things get crazier. The next one, use wider lenses for party pictures. I use a 14-30 a lot of times. I can get most of the party or anything around me in focus. And also I like wide lenses and the way they look. So use a wide lens. Next, if you can't rely on autofocus, don't use it. Let's say it's dark and your camera's struggling and you're struggling. Believe it or not, you can turn off the autofocus, switch your lens to manual focus, and use what we talked about a little while ago, zone focusing. You can use your manual focus and focus on something that's about 3 feet to 4 feet away. Set your aperture to 5.6. And this, by the way, this is stuff you need to practice at home. Use plush toys, use your kids. Focus at 5.6 and then have your flash firing away. At 5.6 and f8, you're gonna get the whole party in focus without any autofocus, okay? This video is about autofocus, but sometimes you gotta take over because your camera's dumb. You're smarter than your camera. All right, 2 bonus things. The first one is there's something else that will affect how sharp your photos are that's not autofocus, and it's called camera shake. If you are at slower shutter speeds shooting flash, it's totally fine. You could shoot flash at 30th of a second, 60th of a second, 100th of a second, and have super sharp photos because the flash freezes the person. However, all of a sudden the DJ turns up the house lights or there's crazy lights. Now you're shooting people at 60th of a second and they're moving. You're gonna get blur. That has nothing to do with your autofocus. That's camera shake and motion blur from the people moving and too much light entering your camera. So just be aware of that. If some of your pictures are blurry, it could be camera shake or motion. And lastly, if you do miss focus, it happens, even to the best of us. Like for example, this weekend there was this dog that was during the candle lighting and I missed the dog's eye. And I was kind of like, all right, it's close enough. And if it's close enough, you can actually use 2 tools I use. Number one is Topaz Sharpen AI. You can isolate the eye and use AI to sort of sharpen it and then bring it back in, and it looks pretty good. Sometimes I add grain on top of that to sort of mask the wonkiness of AI sharpening. And the second thing is you can use Photoshop. You can use Photoshop to sort of mask out the area of interest, and you can sharpen the eye. And then you can also select the background if the camera accidentally focused on the background. Select the background and then just blur that a little bit. And you can sharpen the foreground and blur the background and then put a bunch of grain over it, and it hopefully will save your butt for that one shot. But if you use all my tips, you're gonna be a master. A master.